It's really late, about 1, 2 in the morning, but I'm gonna go ahead and review Star Trek First Contact anyway. Let's get right into it, people.
Hello? Popcorn delivery.
Put a little weekend in your week. Rent a video.
So yeah, I've decided that it'd be best to review First Contact right after Generations, because they really go hand in hand. First Contact is also a pretty good next-gen movie. I'd say Nemesis and Insurrection aren't so great, but First Contact and Generation are, they're both pretty good movies, all things considered. I prefer Generations, but that's just me, because it's got Captain Kirk. But First Contact is pretty okay. It's pretty well done. There are some people who think it's the best, and that's just because it has Borgs, and I do like Borgs. I think they're a great villain. They're pretty cool, and they're obviously one of the greatest villains of the franchise as a whole. Right up top there with the Romulans, but I must say this isn't as good a movie as Generations. Right off the bat, I should mention that. Now, just like with Generations, I have a lot of false memories about this film. For one, I remember this really creepy dream sequence where Captain Picard is taken captive by the Borg Queen on a Borg cube, and her torso is lowered on wires. And that does happen in the movie, except it's not a dream. And she captures Data instead of Picard, and she only really talks with Picard at the very end. But I remember this really creepy scene somewhere in the middle, which is just pure body horror. And geez, I remember Locutus comes out, and he's full of parts and shit, and I don't know, that's not in this movie. And maybe it was just because I was 8, and when you're 8, the Borg are freaking horrifying, so maybe I just remember this as really horrifying, freaking body horror to the max. But this movie is not really that creepy, and you'd think, a Borg movie would try to amp up the creep factor as much as possible. The Borg are pretty gosh darn scary, and I feel all the episodes of Next Gen that feature them just aren't that horrifying, and you'd think that a movie centered around the Borg would be really full of all this viscera and freaking, horrifying Borg imagery, but it's really not. It's way funnier than I remember. I don't remember the part about Zefram Cochrane or the time travel bit at all. I just remember the Borg, and but I don't remember the Zefram Cochrane bit. I don't remember all the jokes. They try and put so many jokes in here. It's freaking weird. But, it does add to the film's charm. In particular note is a bit where the bit about the leak. There's the bit where you got it's just so many jokes in the script. I think this has the most jokes of all the Star Trek movies. Why is it trying to be a comedy? I guess to lighten up the mood, because it's so bleak and sad and Borg's everywhere, but I don't know. But then again, it's also a very hopeful movie with a great message about humanity's potential. And the First Contact theme is just so freaking hopeful. It's just the most hopeful flippin' theme. I'm notoriously bad at remembering these themes, but it's just really good. It's a nice theme. I really like it. Now, of course, the plot of First Contact is pretty good. It's a nice time travel plot. I always like time travel. And this one there's Yesterday's Enterprise on Next Gen, which is just a really epic and cool and well-written like complex time travel story where you really have to think about what's going on.
Military log, supplemental. Lieutenant Tasha Yah has transferred to the Enterprise C.
This isn't as complex, but it is kind of a, I can't say this movie rips off like Back to the Future or any other time travel movie that came before it. The plot, for the most part, is pretty interesting. Now, Star Trek has kind of a shoddy history with time travel. For instance, in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, where Kirk and company travel back to, 1980s California or whatever, San Francisco, where they travel back to 1980s California, they act like they've never been in that period of time before, even though 3 times on the original series, Tomorrow is Yesterday or whatever it is, Assignment Earth and City on the Edge of Forever, they return to Earth in the 20th century and time travel back. And 2 of them are in the 60s, 1 is in the 40s, but don't tell me that's that different from the 80s. But in Voyage Home, they act like they've never been to the 20th century before, and they're like, oh my god, we're on this street and there's buses, and it's like, yeah, geniuses, it's happened 3 times before.
You realize, of course, that we give him the formula. We're altering the future.
What? How do we know he didn't invent the thing?
But that's the Star Trek movies 2 through 6 for you. They don't care about previously established continuity. And add on to that traveling back in time to the time that the movie is made is just kind of boring and lame. A good example is probably Future's End and Voyager. It's not a very good time travel episode. Because, the 90s weren't that interesting or cool. But this goes back to a time in the Star Trek timeline that's actually pretty interesting and cool. Because you've got to remember that in the Star Trek universe, humanity has already been through World War III. Right after World War III, Zefram Cochrane makes his famous space flight in his aptly titled spaceship, the Phoenix. Obvious metaphor, humanity rising from the ashes after its darkest moment and enters a new period of prosperity, a golden age of cooperation with the Vulcans. This is an interesting period in Earth's history, unlike Enterprise, which is a period nobody really cares about. Zefram Cochrane's first historic spaceflight is admittedly a pretty cool time for the crew of the Enterprise E to travel back to. Now, the only real problem I have with this movie is that the guy, Zefram Cochrane was already in the original series episode Metamorphosis, which is a really good episode. I really like Zefram Cochrane in Metamorphosis. If you haven't seen Metamorphosis, you'll probably like this Zefram Cochrane. You probably won't have any issues with this Zefram Cochrane. But if you've seen Metamorphosis first, which actually I saw First Contact first, but like I said, I didn't remember any of the parts with Zefram, and then I watched Metamorphosis, so that's really my first remembrance of Zefram. If you've seen Metamorphosis first, you'll understand that this James Cromwell guy just doesn't seem like original Zefram at all. Even though in Metamorphosis he's a younger version of Zefram, and this is old Zefram, they're clearly not even close to the same guy. Apparently Tom Hanks was almost in this role. He would have been way too wholesome. And both Zeframs are assholes, and that's necessary for the character of Zefram Cochrane, this historic figure who's actually a lot different from how history paints him, much like all historical figures at the end of the day. And that idea is conveyed perfectly in Metamorphosis. Tom Hanks just would have been too wholesome. There's a lot of roles Tom Hanks was almost in that he wasn't. It's kind of interesting. But, so it's James Cromwell. And he's a relative unknown, and, apparently he's in some Next Gen episodes. I didn't know some. But he is an asshole, just a very different kind of asshole. Now, in Metamorphosis, of course, the plot deals with Zefram Cochrane being kept alive for hundreds of years by the companion, a weird light beast that looks kind of like Jello. And in the episode, the idea of him starting a serious relationship with his companion is brought up by Kirk and Spock and McCoy. And Cochrane just rejects the idea wholesale. He believes that interspecies romance is some sort of abomination, some kind of crime against God.
He is part of me.
And this is because, and this is really interesting, and Star Trek really deconstructs science fiction right from the get-go. It's one of the most revolutionary science fiction franchises of all time. Cochrane represents the old-time, Flash Gordon type space adventurer who kills aliens, doesn't give a shit about the Prime Directive, and he's really a bigot. And that's important to get across. Kirk and Spock, being from the 23rd century, are enlightened and understand that there's nothing wrong with starting a relationship with this companion alien. But Cochrane is like, F, no, I want to kill it with my laser gun, because he's 200 years behind the times. And that's really what ought to be conveyed here. It would have made a lot of sense if, after the Vulcans land in the final scene, Cochrane says something offensive about their ears or something, at the very least, but no, the first meeting goes perfectly smoothly. And maybe that's due to the interference of the crew of the Enterprise E, but, I do feel that James Cromwell is nothing like the original Zephyr. Apparently, the original Zephyr is one of the guys on Route 66, which is also one of my favorite shows. Massive influence on Herman the Hitchhiker. I really like Route 66. But by the time this movie was made, he was dead, so what you gonna do, right? Really, really crazy. Now, one thing about the Borg is that there's a lot of people who diss them. There are some morons, some British simps who insist that the Cybermen from Doctor Who, that the Borg ripped them off, and it's like, no. The Cybermen are frickin' tin cans. They ain't the frickin' Borg. If anything, Satan's robot from Voyager in the frickin' Captain Proton simulation ripped off the Cybermen, because they're both cheesy as hell. But the Borg aren't a rip-off of anything. There's some people, to justify this absolutely bizarre claim, will claim, that the Cybermen say resistance is futile, like Star Trek invented that phrase, or Doctor Who invented that phrase, and it's like, no, they didn't. I've seen that phrase in 20 other things before the Cybermen or the Borg even existed.
Resistance would be futile.
Just because the Cybermen tell people not to resist doesn't mean that the Borg ripped them off. What the shit? And to the best of my understanding, the Cybermen don't assimilate anyone, so it's they're just freaking robot guys with stupid looking faces. Oh, I'm a freaking Cyberman. They're not cool in a retro way like Robbie the Robot or anything. They're just lame in a stupid, cheesy schlock way. And because, of course, the British don't understand what makes American science fiction appealing. Forbidden Planet is, a pretty cheesy movie, but it also has a lot to say about the human condition. And Doctor Who doesn't accomplish that. It's just magic man with crazy gadgets going around the universe. But enough shitting on Doctor Who. Back to First Contact. This VHS case does, of course, have a neat little 3D graphic here. And when you tilt it, Captain Picard gets a Borg implant and turns into Locutus, and Data's head comes open and it reveals his positronic brain, and then you got the Borg queen up top with her eyes shimmering. It's pretty cool. I like this 3D graphic, and it looks pretty snazzy. Very nice design, and then you got the Borg in a nice triangle pattern here at the bottom. It's a good poster. I like it. Probably my favorite part about this movie is all the cameos. There's two that come to mind. First, you got Barclay, I like the bit with Barclay. I didn't even know Barclay was still on the ship at this point, but I guess he is. Good old bumbling Barclay. What a laugh riot. What an absolute gem of character. Every episode with Barclay is a lot of fun. He's also in Voyager, of course. It's a good fun time. I like how Barclay is in this for some reason.
Dr. Cochran, I know this sounds silly, but can I shake your hand?
Whatever reason. The other one, of course, is the bit with the EMH. Robert Picardo, the doctor from Voyager, who also is in an episode of DS9.
Perhaps you'd like an analgesic cream?
I don't remember that bit at all, but it's pretty funny. I really like the fan service, as it were. There's a lot more fan pandering in this than Generations, but I mean, unless you consider Captain Kirk fan pandering, yeah, there's a lot of fan pandering, a lot of lip service, a lot of giving the people what they want, I guess, which is Barclay and the Doctor from Voyager in one scene. And it does seem kind of random, kind of dropped in there, but, you know, it works at the end of the day. I don't know why the heck the Enterprise would have an EMH, but I guess they all come equipped with them. Franchise gets weird at this point. And then there's the bit where Deanna gets drunk, and I think they're trying to show a new side of her that hasn't been seen before. It's kind of tacky, I don't get it, but they're trying for some character development, but like, one thing I will say this movie doesn't do very well is it doesn't convey like the destruction of World War III. Like, it's nuclear war. It's like, but like, the world doesn't seem that bad. Like, you got like a nice bar with a full stock of liquor and a fun jukebox that, you know, Zephyr kicks like the Fonz and starts playing, oh shit, Rudy Tooty. But like, really, like, if you're gonna have a story set after World War III, like, make it shit. Make the world like garden, you know, like there's hobos and stuff, and, you know, ramshackle type shacks, but I'm talking like mutants and shit. I mean, World War III is obviously going to have some very heavy nuclear fallout and stuff. But, I don't know. I guess it doesn't fit with the hopeful theme of this movie that is also somehow very bleak and dark. And one thing I think is kind of not how it would go down at all is that when the Enterprise goes back to their timeline, it's the exact same timeline exactly as they left it. And, like, I understand that they try to be secretive and they dress in the clothes of the time, but I mean, like, Zephyr Cochrane still just has, like, 50 random strangers show up from out of nowhere and help him build his spaceship, and, like, obviously people would see that. They'd be like, where the shit did all these people come out of? And, like, at the very least, a minor conspiracy theory would be spread around, and the crew of the Enterprise E would go down in as much notoriety as the Men in Black, you know, but, like, they're not invisible, they're just walking around. I mean, at least at this point, Geordi doesn't have his visor. Like, gosh, you know, people from the 21st century would just be like, what the shit is going on here? And you just got Barclay walking around willy-nilly, and it's like, it's very haphazard when it comes to preserving the timeline. Like, the script is okay. It's a very well-written script. In the first scene, you got, for some fan service, you got Worf in the Defiant. I can only imagine what the reaction of people back in '97 was like. Oh man, it's the Defiant on the big screen.
Perhaps today is a good day to die.
You know, because at this point, Worf is on DS9. It's like, wow, he's commandeering the Defiant. But all things considered, I don't care much about the Defiant. To have it in a movie, I do like how Worf beams aboard the Enterprise, and they're like, we got a new passenger, and Worf comes on board, and it's like, yay, Worf, you know? Then, on the other hand, you got the bit where, you know, I think one of the things which makes First Contact truly epic and gives the story so much stakes is that, you know, the only way to really get human audiences to understand the full impact and threat of the Borg is to have them attack Earth. So, you know, if they attacked Ferenginar or Bajor or some shit, you'd just be like, yeah, so what? But they're going for Earth, and you see the Borg cube hurtling toward Earth, and you're like, holy shit, these Borgs mean business. I hope the humans are able to take them down. So that's, you know, obviously, Earth, a real planet, has far more stakes. So human audiences care about that more. I like that. And it, you know, whenever Earth shows up in Star Trek, it puts the whole thing into perspective. Like, Earth is just like Risa, just a ball of, just a speck of dust in the cosmos, just like Ferenginar. But yeah, I do like that. I like how when they blow up the Borg cube, and you know, you think, oh man, that was a close one. This Borg sphere comes hurtling out of the Borg cube. It's like, oh shit, these Borgs have everyone outmatched. Like, holy shit, these Borgs aren't messing around. These Borgs got frickin' Borg spheres inside their Borg cube, so even if you blow up the cube, the sphere can just go. Like, it's so like awful just how relentless the Borg are. They're such a ceaseless enemy. We got the bit with the Dixon Hill holodeck. I really like that. It's very lavish. They really went all out on, you know, bringing Dixon Hill in, and I like that. Yet another bit of fan service. And then you got the bit with the Borg Queen. And, like, that's just the part, like, I don't really get. Because she says, like, hey, I was there when you became Locutus, remember, Picard? And Picard's like, oh my gosh, I remember now. You were there when I became Locutus. And it's like, who are they trying to kid? The Borg Queen wasn't there when he became Locutus. She never showed up. Her voice wasn't in there. Like, she wasn't there. And I think that's a really, like, lame retcon. It obviously was not planned out very well. And it is just crazy to think that before First Contact, up until the second Star Trek movie, like every episode of Next Gen with the Borg, there's no Borg Queen. She seems like such an integral part of the Borg, and I really like her. She's a very nice villain, revealing that the supposed collective of the Borg is all a front. And really, the Borg have their own hierarchy like any other society, with the drones working for the Queen, much like a beehive. But I just find it crazy to think that she wasn't in anything before this. And obviously, she's in Voyager, and it's very epic. They're fighting Janeway and you know, trying to get 7 and 9 back in the collective. I really like the Borg Queen. Great character, but the way in which she inserts herself into Best of Both Worlds, it's like, nah, I'm not buying it. Like, and the excuse given is, oh, it was so traumatic, Picard blocked her from his memory of the event. And it's like, why would he block her? If anything, she'd be the most memorable part of his experience, because she's really the only Borg with any personality or individuality. And, you know, it seems like he'd remember her the most of all, because she's like the queen, you know. And obviously he has vivid hallucinations and flashbacks to his time in the collective and his stint as Locutus. So you'd really think he'd remember the Borg Queen, but he just doesn't. He just blanks it out of his mind, which I just find really crazy and kind of hackneyed. It's not a good explanation. Like, I really like the Borg Queen, but they could have said, like, she wiped his memory or something that would have made sense, but she wasn't there. The Borg didn't have a queen before First Contact. It's pretty crazy to think about. She's such a good character. Yeah, so that's not so great, but Alfre Woodard's in this. She's pretty good. Obviously, she knows what she's doing. Her character is pretty good. I'd even go so far as to say it's better than Cochrane. The scenes with her and Picard showing her the crazy futuristic stuff is very, very nice, and you get the idea that, she's gonna tell her grandchildren about the day she met Picard. But, I mean, he is messing up the timeline, because, he doesn't tell her, hey, don't tell anyone about this or anything. She can just go blabbing to anyone she wants and mess up the timeline irreparably, but, not much temporal logic in this. But it kind of sacrifices, complete adherence to, not messing up the timeline as much as possible so the Enterprise E can get back to where they belong. In favor of, feel good, oh man, look, it's a future, and it's happy, hey, come over here to the window and look at Earth, and then, hey, Cochrane, you're gonna be such a great guy when you do this thing. And it's kind of sappy, but, the effects are really nice. There's a lot of CGI in this, but you barely even notice it, because all the Borg stuff looks so good. Of course, you got the very morbid scene where Picard has to kill a member of his own crew, and because he's been infected, and he just takes out the phaser, whammo. That's some dark shit right there. No attempts to cure, no none of that, because they ain't got time to spare. They will kill a Borg if they see one. None of that mercy shit, trying to bring him back from the Borg like they did with Locutus. Captain Picard can be assimilated and brought back to human, but some random crewman, screw that. Bzz. And Alfred Woodard's character even brings this up. She's like, you ain't gonna try to bring a sick bay or anything. But of course that would have been futile. Because resistance is futile. Probably one of the most epic movie lines is when, across all of cinema, is when Worf says, assimilate this, and blows up the Borg probe. And the anti-grav effects on the bottom of the Enterprise E are just really good. They're really pulled off well. I really like those anti-gravity effects. It's nice to see, some realistic space floating. You don't see that much in Star Trek, because all the Enterprises and DS9 and everything have the, artificial gravity installed. So it's nice to see them try a nice anti-gravity situation and pull it off. Excellente. I don't know if I've brought this up before. There's an episode of Enterprise where the British guy gets his legs stuck in this Romulan death vice or something on the outside of the crappy Enterprise NX 0001X or whatever it is. And they got Scott Bakula in this early 2000s CGI garbage. And it just looks like a cartoon. It looks like a video game cutscene. I'm not even kidding. I'm not memeing. This scene in Enterprise with an anti-gravity, bottom of the outside of the whole of the ship environment, much like the one in First Contact, looks really awful. It looks so fake. But First Contact pulls it off, and somehow First Contact was made 5 years earlier, so that's really something. I assume they made a nice sound stage, and they got the actors on wires, and it just looks very good. It looks very real. As do all the Borg apparatus. It looks pretty good. I think the green smoke at the end is CGI, as are some of the wires from the ceiling. I don't know, but they really went to great detail to Borg up the ship and make all the walls covered in Borg stuff, and everywhere you look, oh man, it used to be the Enterprise with the cool, sleek hallways, but now it's the frickin' Borg ship. And I really like how just gradually the Enterprise goes from being this nice, safe, cozy, nice ship to being this, grotesque, infested abomination. And the Borg are like pathogens, just going through this carcass and just infecting it deck by deck, level by level, hallway by hallway. It's a very cool deal. And like what's even more terrifying is we don't even see where the Borg first get on. They just infect the ship at some point, starting in engineering, making their way all the way up to the bridge in the ready room. And it's just terrifying to think that a Borg could just sneak on so easily without being detected and just take over the ship. And once they realize it's too late and the ship is pretty much gone and they think of scrapping it and, abandoning it. And in retrospect, I kind of wish that's what would have happened, because I don't really like the Enterprise E, but they keep it, and I don't know. Must be a real chore to remove all that Borg technology from the walls and scrape it off like barnacles from a ship. It just looks so gross. And the idea of, some parasitic infection is very prevalent. And I really like that. It really conveys the spookiness of the Borg. So even if this movie doesn't have too much on the body horror level, if you consider the Enterprise a body, man, this is some serious ass body horror, because the Borg F that shit up.
The body dies.
They make it look like their meal. If you catch the drift, they make that look like their territory, and they just turn engineering into a full-on Borg palooza with a green warp core and everything. It's very neat. Whoever did sets, definitely kudos to. It doesn't say. It says who's the costume designer. It says it's Industrial Light and Magic, but yeah, whoever's behind the sets, good job. But yeah, like I said, this Cochrane isn't so great. Like he I don't know, there's just something like too nice about him. Like, he doesn't feel like the original Cochrane. And this is the first instance of Star Trek not giving a shit in regards to continuity. On the Wikipedia page for First Contact, which I read before this, yes, I'm doing research for this for once, the team behind says, oh, we didn't really care that he wasn't like the original Cochrane. And it's like, you kind of gotta care, he's the same character. And I find it kind of crazy that Cochrane even would be in the original series. Like, that's just how crazy advanced original series was, how ahead of its time, that it has a character who ideally would be saved up for a big reveal in a movie like this, but instead is already in the original series 30 years beforehand. It's like, geez, Star Trek, slow it down a little. We don't need to see Zefram Cochrane right off the bat. Save him for the movie. But I do like original Zefram Cochrane more, so sue me. I think this Cochrane is just like kind of a watered down version. Like, he's an asshole, but he's not. You don't see as much of the differences between the present and the future as you do in Metamorphosis. And you just, you're watching Patrick Stewart and all this the whole time, and you're like, Patrick Stewart is epic. I like Patrick Stewart. And I don't want to see some other guy play Picard when he dies. But that's kind of the treatment they give to Zefram Cochrane, who died just like 4 years before this was made, like 1993, I think. The guy who played original Zefram just died, and, I must say, James Cromwell is alright. All things considered, he tried his best. His spin on the character's kind of fun, and if he had even tried a little bit more to be like original Zefram, he might have been able to pull it off. He is older Zefram, but he's not even like close to original Zefram. Like, it would have made sense if he was just older Zefram, but he's not. So I don't know. I don't really like that. But I will give this film kudos for introducing the Borg Queen. What a spectacular villain! What a fun time! And I really like the old-fashioned Vulcans and their ship. They look really good. I can buy that, that's an early Vulcan right there, and it looks a lot more convincing than all the Vulcans in Enterprise who are played by these garbage hack actors with, these freaking stupid looking line delivery, and DePaul is just abysmal. But the Vulcans in this movie look pretty good. They look like, that's Sarek's grandpa right there, I buy it. I don't know, I think the Moby Dick metaphor is just kind of shoved in there last minute. Like, the idea that, like, Alfred Woodard's character says, like, Picard, you shouldn't be so hard on the Borg. It's getting to be an obsession. It's getting to be, like, you're wasting your time. Quit trying to fight the Borg. And it's like, why the shit wouldn't Picard fight the Borg? They're freaking awful. And then there's the bit where, Captain Picard just gives up the ship, basically, and he's just like, yeah, screw it. We'll just live out the rest of our lives on some remote desert island, and we won't even get back to our normal timeline, but at least it'll happen centuries in the future. And it's like, what's the point then, He just gives up, and he's like, yeah, self-destruct, screw it.
No!
It's just kind of, like, it's not like Moby Dick. The Borg aren't just some peaceful whale floating around the sea all happy. They're frickin' Borgs. They're frickin' sharks. So yeah, nothing wrong with trying to hunt down the frickin' Borg. I don't think Moby Dick is the best, analogy anyway. It's not like Picard just wants some petty revenge. The Borg are trying to destroy humanity. That's a cause worth fighting for. I don't think it's petty to try and keep history how it should be and stop the Borg from, making the entirety of Earth just this Borg paradise with methane atmosphere and whatever. The Borg Earth looks really, really cool and, in a freaky, awful way, but, the Moby Dick stuff is just, I don't get it. It's not it. That ain't it, Chief. But, the idea is that, in Best of Both Worlds, Picard was assimilated, and he's pissed. And, it tries and brings in, the continuity. It tries and, really completes the arc from Locutus to this. Captain Picard says, I am going to bring the Borg down once and for all. And of course, the Borg don't really get brought down until in-game with Voyager, but it's just not that deep as it think it is with the Moby Dick thing. He's not Captain Ahab, he's Captain Picard, and he's trying to stop the Borg. It's not some futile pursuit. No matter how much the Borg will insist the resistance is futile, it's something worth going after, I don't know. It's just, and I don't like how Picard just abandons his mission so casually. He's just like, yeah, screw it, we'll just live on an island forever. That doesn't seem like Picard, really. He's not one to give up so freaking easy.
Prepare to evacuate the Enterprise.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the Next Generation crew engage in their most thrilling adventure yet. It might be. It's definitely more thrilling than Generations. It's got a lot more action, and it says a sci-fi action event that stands proud and apart, according to Richard Corliss from Time. I will say this is a lot more an action movie than Generations. They call themselves the Borg, a half-organic, half-machine collective with a sole purpose, to conquer and assimilate all races. Led by their seductive and sadistic queen, Alice Kriege. I don't know if she's that seductive. She's really not that hot. She's not 7 and 9. She's got frickin' wires sticking out of her carcass. It's covered in, goo. I've never heard anyone call her seductive.
You haven't been properly stimulated yet.
So anyway, the Borg are headed to Earth with a devious plan to alter history. Picard's last encounter with the Borg almost killed him. Guess what? Best of both worlds isn't Picard's last encounter with the Borg. They're in quite a few episodes between that and this. So that's inaccurate. Now he wants vengeance, but how far will he go to get it? Just enough to save humanity. He's not going to violate the Prime Directive, but obviously he is going to keep the timeline how it's supposed to be. Because the Borg are pretty much violating the Prime Directive by going back in time and shitting all over humanity and trying to prevent Zefram Cochrane's epic first space flight. So that's, there's nothing wrong with stopping that from happening. Like, it's not vengeance, it's just his job. He's a captain, and his job is to keep Earth safe and shit. But yeah, co-starring Alfred Woodard and James Cromwell, and bursting with spectacular special effects, Star Trek First Contact is one action film that has it all. The special effects in here are pretty cool. I will agree with that. But, I'm just a simp for Generations. I like Captain Kirk, and I like how Scott and Chekhov are in that first scene. I just like Soren, He's a good villain. I like Generations more, but yeah, this movie is okay. Like, it's not the best, and it's definitely not like, wow, this is the best of the Star Trek movie. It's not. But it is pretty good. It's pretty well made. Clearly a lot of thought, a lot of passion went into it, and it's directed by Jonathan Frakes, so it's gotta be good, and he's a good director. He really brings a lot to the table. Steve Oldfield from Fox TV says, one of the 10 best films of the year. You'll love this film. Yeah, it might have been in 97. The special effects are really nice. The story is nice. Just some bits of the story aren't that great. Like, some bits just really are kind of, where'd they get that from, but, I don't know, the whole thing with Zefram Cochrane, admittedly, is an interesting plot, even if James Cromwell's interpretation isn't so canon. I guess it is canon. I don't know, you can even call something canon when you have two completely different actors playing the same character in a franchise which happens in the same universe. They aren't alternate timelines. I just can't buy James Cromwell being an older version of the original Zefram in Metamorphosis. I'm just saying. I don't know. The Borg are definitely the high selling point of this movie, and they definitely bring to the table everything the Borg are notorious for. Ruthlessness, a ceaseless barrage of death and destruction, and a complete lack of understanding of anything besides getting that assimilation. So yeah, I will say that it definitely has strong points for the Borg, and the Borg Queen is epic, but the bit about Cochrane and everything, I like how Barclay's in it, and the bit where Data gets shot up and he's like bulletproof. I don't know exactly how that works. Like, I know he's strong, but like, it's never mentioned that his skin is bulletproof. But I don't know. Whatever. It's an okay movie, and you got all the good stuff in here that come to expect from the franchise, and there's definitely a better movie than Nemesis. This is a well put together movie all around. So some bits in here don't really make much sense, but for the most part, it's an okay movie. And when you hear Geordi saying that it's getting kind of hot in engineering, that something's up. Something is pretty freaking wrong up in this pizzazz. And, personally, I don't really care about the Enterprise E getting infected as much as I do the Enterprise D crash landing. Because, the Enterprise D is the ship that, you've come to know and love over the course of, 7 years. But whatever. It's still a nice deal, and the Enterprise is moderately well designed. I think they put a lot of thought into a redesigned, nice, futuristic Enterprise, even if it's not that great and kind of looks bad. Like it's not as aesthetically appealing, if that makes sense. But then again, it is just built for war and shooting at Borg cubes, and you really don't need visual appeal for that, or tin forward or anything. None of that, recreational stuff. This Enterprise is just for being badass and edgy. So yeah, there's definitely an edgy film, but I like it. It's a lot better than I remember, and there's some really funny moments in here, and a lot of good, nice, positive messages about humanity being born again from the ashes, reconstructed anew, and entering a golden new era of space flight and warp breakthroughs. And I don't know, it's pretty good overall. So I'm gonna do a first for this series and give this one a 4.5. It's definitely not a 4-star movie. It's good, but it just doesn't live up to the grandeur and prestige of Generations.
Somehow, I question your motives.
Generations is, like I said, one of the 2 definitive Star Trek films, the other being the motion picture. But for all it's worth, all intents and purposes, this is a pretty epic movie, and definitely one of the most epic stuff with the Borg. So if you're into the Borg, this is the watch for you. If you like the Borg, then you'll like this. And if you haven't seen Metamorphosis, this will probably really be your bag, because you won't understand just how much James Cromwell's interpretation of Zephyr really breaks the continuity and immersive feeling of the Star Trek universe. But someone had to play Zephyr, because by this point original Zephyr was dead. So who can blame him? So yeah, 4.5 stars. It's pretty solid. That said, this has been a review of Star Trek First Contact. Pretty good movie. I wish I could give this 5 stars, but I do like to discriminate a little and save 5 stars only for the best of the best. 4.5. That said, if you'd like to support these reviews, then write to Nicholas Cicada, 1424 Columbine Street, number 1, Denver, Colorado 80206. We're only on the 15th review. There's still a heck of a lot more to come, and a heck of a lot more fun to be had with these old VHS tapes and the swell movies that are on them. So, that said, like it if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in just a bit with a brand new VHS Crazy review. Sayonara, suckers.